Oh, good. Okay, it's my turn now. So where do I start? Because there's way more than I'm able to show you in 45 minutes. And so let's start with that. So Pester 5 is coming. It's something that I've been working on for a long time, but let's start about me. I'm Jakub, no HVND on Twitter. I'm owner of Pester, also author of Pester 5, because most of the commits are mine. And I recently joined Microsoft and I work there on the VS Test platform. So it's not very far from what I do in my open source time. But Pester is still my open source project that I do in my free time. So no transitioning on the Microsoft inside or anything like that. Let's see a little bit of timeline of Pester 5. So far there has been 162 commits and it's 20,000 changes and 13,000 deletions. And I didn't reformat everything just to get the count. If you, for example, look, it doesn't matter. But let's go to the timeline. So I started the development on June 2018, I think, somewhere in the middle of 2018. And then on January, the details are blurry because I squashed the commit because I'm stupid. And then in January 2019, there was an alpha 1. You can find it in the releases. I just today, if you get notifications that there are new releases in Pester, I just today took all the release notes and republished them as releases. So you can go into the history and see how it developed. Then on March 2019, basically 1 year into development, I finally get my first test run passing. That was really awesome. And it wasn't all the tests commented out, luckily, but there were some times when everything passed and I just didn't realize I'm not running any tests. So yeah, that really sucked to realize. And then on May 2019, Alpha 4, then on February, we get beta. And then recently I've been publishing RC125, and there will be RC6 soon. And I expect in May, I will be publishing general availability and then hope that there are no major bugs. So Pester 5 is coming. Please pin your versions to 499.99 or whatever high number of your choosing you fancy, because I don't want to break your code bases when I drop the new update. So if you have some project, just spend 10 minutes going over them, and wherever you do import module, just specify the maximum version to be 499.99 and you should be golden. Now it's demo time, because who likes slides? I don't. So what I have here is a build of VS Code extension that is running right now, because I did some recent changes that are not merged yet, and I want to show them to you. So hopefully this won't crash, because it takes a while to restart, but if it does, we will see. So I'm just going to do get module to make sure I have the correct version loaded. And it's RC6. That's not published yet, but everything that I will be showing will be published soon, or is already in the process of being published. So first, the experience as you know it now, the interactive experience in VS Code. You have this run tests on describe, and then you see run tests on describe in here. So you can go and run the test, and it will run the test that we have in the file. Actually, what you would normally see would be more like this, because you would see all the output from all the tests. Then you can do the same thing on this describe, and it will run the test in just this describe. But what's kind of weird is that you cannot do it here, because this is a context and this is a describe. But internally, they are totally the same. They are just the same function with one parameter that's called command used, which specifies what happens. So this is a bit weird. So with the updates to Pester 5 and with the updates to VS Code, you can now go here and you can disable this use legacy code lens, which enables the full power of the VS Code extension with Pester 5. And while I'm here, I will just set this from the default of diagnostic. That's a new option that I'm adding to normal. And this one will be also set to normal, because the default is from preference and the preference is minimal right now. So I'm just leaving that like this. And it sometimes takes a while to update. So let's hope it will work now. So the old experience is still there. Sure, let's try that. Let's hope this doesn't break all the formatting. This is the biggest that I can do right now. Let's hope that's enough. So this is the experience that we have, and now we have this run test that is still the same, but now we can also run just a single test. Let's move that up. So now I'm just running this single test, and I can also debug it, of course. So this is really awesome for your interactive experience. You just set your breakpoints and you don't have to hit them 20 times before you reach the correct test to debug. You just click debug on the single test and it will run just that single test. And if you have a breakpoint in it, you will immediately hit that breakpoint. You can also notice that we have this setup for describe, which is coming from here, and then we have all the setups that are above that, and we would have all the teardowns as well. But what we don't run is this slow setup in here, unless we run everything. So if we run everything, we will hit this slow setup and it will run. But if we run just this test, it will just run the stuff that's necessary because Pester now does discovery and sees what needs to be run and so on. Now, the debugging is great. And there was a recent addition. I think I did it like last week. And I see I'm missing my breakpoints here, which is unfortunate. Let's try running this script if it will fix that. Let's go on. Just to reopen everything. Oh, come on. Now we have my breakpoint. So I have this inline breakpoint. You can set that by Shift F9 if you didn't know. And I'm just trying to show you how you would debug your code in the mocks without reformatting it. But in the rest of the code, I reformatted it to make it easier to see. So now I will try to debug this test, and I will hit this breakpoint because nothing before that was invoked yet, because this doesn't run before we run the mock, and those two things also don't run. Now I go to the next step and I hit a breakpoint in a mock, which is not possible in version 4, but I changed the code a bit, and now you can debug your mocks. So you can go here, and you can, by pressing F8, let's hope if that works, evaluate that code and see that it will evaluate to false. So because we are running from this default mock, which didn't get any parameters, we should be hitting this fire right now if we continue. And we do that. So we return this, we pass this test, and we go to the next mock. So this one is parameterized. So we again hit this parameter filter, and we can again try to evaluate it by pressing F8, which sadly doesn't work. It evaluates to true, so this mock should be used, and we should return a fire truck. And that happens. So now if you have advanced scenario where you need to figure out what the mocks are doing and why are they not firing, you can set the breakpoints in here. But you could kind of see that this is a bit difficult to do. You have to understand how the mocks work and so on, and it's not extremely usable, even though I thought it will be. So let's switch this setting for the debug output verbosity to diagnostic, which is the default. And let's see what happens. So I have the same test. You cannot see the fire truck because my font is now too big, but I have a few breakpoints in here, and I will try to debug this test. So did I disable the other thing? Fire. That's a weird fluke. And everything is stuck now. Come on. Run test, please. Okay. We need to kill the terminal, start PowerShell again. Okay. Now I re-import Pester. And hopefully, oh yeah. So finally, we can see that we are getting more output because we set it to diagnostic and we are just debugging. So now we are before hitting the first mock, before defining it. And I go on and I can get more output. And it says, I'm setting up a default mock for get emoji. We're in a test. So I'm trying to return the mock table from the test scope. Then I'm searching for the command get emoji in the color scope, found it, and we don't have a hook. So hook is the function that we define to provide the mocking behavior. And we also provide an alias that will be get emoji. So we define a new hook with a bootstrap function that's called pester mock and then some GUID to avoid conflict. And then we added a new default behavior. So that's this. So you can immediately see what the mock is doing. We go to the next one. It just does the same thing with parameterized mock. It just finds the existing hook and just attaches the behavior to it. And now is where the interesting part comes. So if we hit the mock, it will tell you, hey, there was a mock invoked for get emoji. So it's coming from the process block. Let's just resolve what will happen. We are looking for all the behaviors, found some in the test, and then found none in the block. And that's what's reality. We don't have any mocks here, but we have mocks here inside of the test. It says, oh, found two behaviors. Those are the behaviors. And then it returns the table and it runs the mock filter. And it says running mock filter, this one without any context. That means you didn't provide any parameters. The filter doesn't pass because emoji null is not equal to firetruck. So we go on to the default mock and use it, execute it, return, and we pass this test. Then we go to the next step and we do totally the same thing. The difference here is that it tells you, I'm running with context, emoji equals firetruck. So that's what you provided to the parameters. And if you have special parameters like PS addition that we cannot use because we cannot redefine them, it will write a warning to tell you that you should use $_PS addition because that's what I replace it with in the parameter filter and in the context. Then it tells you that it used this behavior to be executed, executes it, and then cleans up. So this is, to me, way better way of diagnosing mocks. And I will be adding more and more logs for the should invoke and should in general and so on, just in a way to give you quick overview of what's happening and a better chance at debugging your tests. You can always disable it just by going here and just say, I want a normal output or a minimal output. It also shows you logs from discovery, from filtering, from skipping, and from such basic things that describe to you what happened. Now, the next thing that is new is filtering on tags, on tests. So you can have tags everywhere right now. So you can have them on describe, you can have them on it. And when I say describe, I mean describe and context, because as I said, those are the same function and I'm just not differentiating anywhere except for mock maybe, but that's for a longer discussion. So let's just set up this magic Pester preference, which just enables me to set some stuff in the context to change the default settings. And then I will set this path because I'm running it interactively, so cannot use PS script root. And then we will just try to invoke some tests. So first I invoke everything. It runs all the tests that we have as you would expect. Then we have the tag Windows. So Windows is a tag on the describe. That's kind of what you could do previously in version 4. Run that, it will run tests just from that block. Then I can also run this tag A, which is present here and here in two different describes. And it runs just those tests. I can also specify multiple tags. And it also runs them from two different describes. Or in interactive use, it's kind of useful to have a like wildcard. So I can match this tag and this tag with just doing B star. Because if you're running interactively, you don't want to spell out the whole tag. Usually, you just want a fast thing of matching multiple things at the same time. One thing that doesn't exist yet, because I didn't know a good way to expose the behavior, is specifying that you want to run all tests that have a tag and that don't have any tag. So this is something that can work in practice, but it's very bad experience when you actually log it somewhere, because then you don't really see the null and it's not replayable. So I'm still thinking about how to make this API more approachable, but ideally this would just give you a tagged test with A and all tests that don't have any tag. So that's filtering. The next step is just a small scenario about real life tagging. So this is a kind of an example of more complicated test suite that has acceptance tests. It has some acceptance tests that are slow and flaky, and that has Windows only tests, and another that is slow, and then Linux only, and then we have some unit tests that are Linux only, and so on. So because you can have tags on everything, you can now use them extensively, and you don't have to kind of organize your tests around how you will be tagging them. Instead, you can tag the tests as you want. So let's set this preference again. Get the logging and the output verbosity, set the path. And then I just wanted to show that you can maybe exclude all the acceptance tests, but don't run any that are flaky, slow, or Linux only, because we are now invoking them on Windows. So it runs just those two tests. And another thing that people love to use is skipping, and that's the dash skip on describe and on test. So now you can have it on both, and of course on context. And so it's a very useful way of skipping some tests, and it crashed again. Okay. I'm just going to go ahead and run all those tests and pay attention to which ones were skipped. So test 1, test 3, test 3, test 3 is skipped. So every test that has a skip or a describe that contains a test, which is skipped, is skipped. So this way we can skip whole blocks. But for example, if we wanted to play around with this test, and we wanted to debug it because it was skipped because it's broken or something like that, you don't want to go here and just like delete this flag and then remember to return it and so on. So there is this idea of explicitly running a test. So if I now go and run this test, even though it's skipped, it will be executed. And this is only if you really focus that test. So if I repeat the same thing on this describe, which is skipped, you will see that only this test runs. So I'm not trying to be clever. I'm not trying to run all the tests that are not skipped, that are skipped, sorry. So if you really just look at the test and just run exactly that, it will run it, but it won't apply to the children if they are skipped. So to avoid running code that you don't want to be run. But it also brings an easy experience for debugging a single test or a part of tests that you skipped on a describe level. Okay, next one. Come on. So here we have collecting should failures. And this is an interesting feature that I wanted to have for a long time. And so here we have a test that has multiple shoulds inside of it, multiple assertions. And that's something that people use often. But this has a big problem because when you run this test, it will fail on the first assertion. And so we just get this information. Thomas should be equal to Jakub, but we don't get this information because we just failed on the first test. We passed this one, but we didn't pass this one. And so what I added is a preference or a configuration option that you can set to continue on error action. So if I run this, it will set the should error action to continue, and that will instruct should to continue to the next error and only fail at the end of the test, unless we specify error action stop. So that gives me all the failures from the test. So it gives me this one. It also gives me this one. And it also gives me this failure from the teardown. Because before, in version 4, if this failed, you would only see the last exception from the test. And so this would be hidden and this would be shown, which is not a good experience. So now you get all the errors from the whole test. And it's shown in a, I guess, or I hope, a readable format which numbers the errors so you can differentiate between them and you can see in which order they were thrown. And this is used on all the levels in the internal runtime. So if this fails in a describe, if this fails in a teardown, like an internal error will happen, this view should be used. Then sometimes you have tests that don't really make sense if the first condition is not met. So if the user is null, then we want this first assertion to fail. And we can specify that by error action stop to say this is a precondition for everything else that will run afterwards. So if we remove this, we would see all the results. Those two don't really make sense. Those two don't really make sense because it was already null. So we can express that this is a precondition for the other one. We could also just specify a because and just say this is a precondition or something like that to be even more explicit. So this is a feature that I wanted to have enabled by default, but then I opted in to make it an opt-in option to avoid more breaking changes than necessary. So you will have to enable it either via this should error action preference, or if you use the more advanced Pester interface, which is dash configuration, you would create this configuration object and you would pass it in with this option. Anyways, next one, the result object. I really like this one. So what happens internally now in Pester is that I try to avoid any implicit state that will overwrite itself. So I'm trying to keep all the information that I have and just put it in this big tree of stuff. So that would include mocks, that would include the results of everything, what Pester will print to the screen when it has an error. Hopefully, based on the feedback from the PowerShell team, it would be also nice to attach the logs that I was showing when diagnosing the mocks. So it's a pretty big object and it has a lot of nice properties. It basically tells you everything about the run. And then because the object is pretty big, it's also pretty difficult to navigate, or wait, it was. So let's just run this. This is just a simple script, just a few tests. So we have this get emoji function, we call it, this one passes, this one fails because we don't have the parameter. And so I just execute the script and I get a result. And we can start by looking at it in here. Hopefully you can still see it, even though it's a bit smaller than the other font. So I just have a watch for this property. Normally we could find it here, but let's not bother with that. Okay, I cannot make it smaller. And so you can immediately see that this run failed. So this is the sign that we use for failed test. And I just call it Pester because I couldn't come up with a better name. Then if we expand it, I try to order the properties based on what you would be interested in first and to make it easy to navigate. So you can see that the whole run failed. It has one failed test and there is no failed bug, no failed blocks. And then there is more information like the duration, if it was executed, and so on. But we can drill down into the containers. We can see that it's a list of one item. And a container is basically a file. It can be a script block. It can probably be a blob of data, but mostly it's a file. And so this container points to this file expectedly because we just executed it. You can also see that it failed. And then we see that it's a file, which item exactly it points to. So this is the file info thing that you get by get item. It has blocks, so it has one block. We can drill down and we can see that this block, the get emoji block. Let's just try to quickly switch to that. So this block, this describe, contains a test, or it failed itself. And if we expand on it, we can see it contains no other blocks, but it contains two tests. Expand on that and see we have this gets cactus, which is the first one that passed, and the other one failed. So drill down even a bit more. We can have a list of error records. Right now we have just one. And then finally, we can focus this one and we can see what the error message is. So if you have more tests this way, you could like kind of in a tree view see what happened. You can drill down. I try to make it as easy to navigate as possible. And you also get those indexes in here. So if we have many blocks, you will see the indexes and you can maybe in the command line easily access them. But you also don't have to drill down into the object. You can just go to the result level and just scroll down and find this failed and failed blocks. So in failed, we have this list of one item, that's the single failed test, and we have an item for every possible state. We also have tests, which is all the tests that we have. And so I open failed, immediately see that get avocado failed, open that, and I can look at the error record and see the error message. Now coming back to the actual script. Oh no, not that far yet. So it doesn't only look nice in the VS Code, it also looks nice in the command line, or at least I hope. So you get this kind of info, you can drill down, you can see those are the containers that you have, you can see the failed tests in here. It actually serializes pretty nicely if you use short names. And right now there is this select object because I'm filtering out properties that I will hide so far before the final release, because I don't want to publish this just yet because it's a tons of properties and it would be very confusing. Then if we look at the container, you can see that we have this path, it has some blocks, it has some more info, like if it passed, if it was skipped, if it should run, if it actually executed, because based on that, we figure out if the state is correct. And then in the blocks, you see the actual block which contains the tests. You can see the script block that was actually attached. And I'm hoping that someone will provide me with formatting XML to make this even nicer and more succinct. And there is an open issue for that on GitHub. Then jumping to the test, this is how the test looks like. So it just has some info. It links back to the root and back to its parent and so on. So, well, this actually isn't right. Well, one more bug to fix. No, this is a block, so this is correct. What did I do wrong? Okay, I don't know. This is the failed test. We have no failed blocks. And then on each error record, I'm adding a display error message and display stack trace property that is what Pester then uses for the error itself. So if we jump over that, ooh, no, didn't want to do that. Nothing works when you demo it. So this is what would be printed to the screen, and this is what the stack trace would be printed to the screen. The good thing about this is that it's formatted in a way that you can navigate directly to it in VS Code. So that's something that I try to apply to all the records. And if you don't see it happen, then it's probably me making a mistake somewhere in the code. So just let me know. Now, breaking changes. I'm just trying to check what the time is. I don't know. I'm just going to go on. So there are many breaking changes, but it's way less breaking changes. Oh, there is a notice about metadata. Yeah, I think about you, Gail, every day. I will add metadata at some point. So there is few breaking changes, but way less than I expected when I started the work on this version of the project. So the first one is that the legacy should syntax is finally gone. So you are not able to do this should be something anymore. And there is a migration guide from Pester 3 to Pester 4 that mainly fixes that for you. So you can use that. I can provide a link later, or it's in our documentation. Let's just run this. It shows a very ugly error, which says parameter set cannot be resolved. And I tried to implement a better error message in here, but because I don't know much about dynamic parameters, if someone does, then please go here to 1406 and try it out and let me know what I'm doing wrong. Because it would be really nicer if this said the legacy parameter set is gone, don't use it, use -b. Then we have mocks, and mocks finally changed to do the logical thing and be scoped on based on where you place them. So if I run those tests, they all pass because we have this function f, and then we have this mock f, which is defined inside of it, and it won't leak outside of the it because it sees I'm inside of an it block, so I will be defined just here. And we invoke it and it returns a mock, but in the next it, there is no mock defined. So it just returns the real thing that's coming from the real function. That's something that I hated for as long as, well, since we decided to make it work this way. So it's my mistake, but it's finally fixed. Then it's also, yeah, the same thing, same idea, but when you define a mock in a before all, it will be defined for the whole describe or context. So it's available both here and both here. So it's trying to be intelligent just based on where you place it. It will be defined in that scope or in that it block. The same thing applies to counting mocks. So if we run this, it again all passes. So we define the function here, we define the mock here, so it will be in the whole describe, and then we try to count it. So here we invoke it once, we count it. What happened? I don't know, probably didn't reset some state or something. Another bug to solve. So it's counted here as 1, and in here it's also counted as 1 because we are scoping just to this. Then if we want to count them everywhere, you can still use this scope describe or scope context. This is the only place where I differentiate between describe and context. So it applies this one to this block. But if there was a context in the middle, it would apply to the describe, not to the context. And then in after each, because after each runs in the same scope as it applies the counting the same way. But if you run it in after all, it actually counts the invocations in the whole describe. That's probably an edge case, and this probably is as well. But it's the logical thing to do, and that's why I do it this way. Then the assert mock called was renamed to should invoke. There is an alias or an alias function for it, and it has this deprecation message, but it still works, and it will be removed somewhere before Pester 6, I guess. But I would recommend to use this should invoke because it's just much nicer syntax. And there was also assert verifiable mocks, which was deprecated in the previous version and is now removed. So full list of the breaking changes is at the bottom of the big README. That's in the v5 branch in Pester. Now, finally, for my last step, I hope I still have some time. Yeah, a few minutes. Oh, nice, thank you. So 8 more minutes. That's about migration. So Chris already migrated PS Script Analyzer, and he has this pull request. If you look at it with this diff without white space, it still looks kind of daunting, but it's not that much work. Most of the changes is just him migrating to this thing, to moving your setups into before all, and then taking advantage of the new features in Pester. Like instead of putting if around your whole block, you define it as a skip with this skip. You don't really see it. Skip dash and then your condition, like A is B or something. Actually, EQB. So then you can bind it to the skip parameter and it will skip your tests or your blocks based on this condition. And I wrote some blogs about how this works and how you should be importing files. So go to them. There's also this migration script, which tries to do this operation automatically for you, but it doesn't handle this case where you have in the describe and it, the function. So if someone wants to help out, it would be really nice if someone could hack together a solution based on this one that would also do this. So most of the things that you need to do in the migration is to get rid of this setup and move it into a before all. One warning is my invocation, my command path won't work in before all. It will be just undefined because it's not defined inside of a function. So this kind of relies on like a placement because it's directly in the script. So it will be defined. In here, it's not, even though it will run directly in the script scope. And so this is also super difficult to spell out or remember. So just delete it, replace it with this, and you should be golden. There's more to it. Like if you want to do something more advanced, you kind of have to understand how the discovery works, but it's a really simple idea. So just read the blog post that I linked, and hopefully it will be easy to understand. And if it's not, then just let me know. Then if you have stuff that's interspersed in your describes, but not in your it blocks, you also should put them into before all. But that was a guidance even in version 4. So if your test suite is well behaved, then pretty much this is the only step that you need to do. And sometimes you don't even need to do it. It will work without it in some cases, but this is a future-proof, and it saves time during discovery if you don't run the tests in this file. So I think that's about it. Maybe if I still have some time, I want to show you this Pester preference and the Pester configuration object that I've been using in a few places. So Pester preference is like a global variable that Pester will check when it imports and when it runs invoke Pester. If you put it on the top of your tests file, it won't look at it, not yet, and maybe not in the future, because then you could have very difficult setup to understand. But you can set it in the context, and if it will pick up on invoke Pester, you can get different behavior. Then if you look at the object itself, you can create it either by, either by calling the default static method on this Pester configuration, and it will try to guide you from through what is possible. So we can go to default.run, and it will show you the options with the descriptions and what is the default and so on. It's not perfect, but it hopefully will describe each option. And then you can go, for example, to path, and it says the default and everything again, and you can just assign ctemp to it. So you don't have to use like .path.value, even though it's present, because I'm doing a little bit of a trick. So you can just use it directly. It's just me inside of Pester to be careful about that. And then you either assign it here into Pester preference, or you will do invoke Pester configuration and provide the object that you would create right here. You can also cast a hash table to it. If you have a more difficult setup, then you can do like Pester configuration and hash table that has like a run and script log and output and debug and so on. Especially the debug options are pretty interesting, but don't misuse them. So yeah, that's about everything that I wanted to show. If there are any questions and if there is still time, then I will invite questions. If not, then thank you for listening. Why is there not a set get Pester preference? Right now, Pester is in a weird state where I only have this very advanced weird object because it has all the options, and it's the easiest way for me to provide the options to you without thinking about making a function or function API that actually makes sense. So there will be a better API, but right now there's just the simple and this advanced object that everything translates into. So more commandlets will be coming, I hope. More questions? Trying to go to the link that you, multiple tags on script log. Yes. Wildcard only, will you add regex? I don't think regex is needed, but we can talk. Have you improved code coverage performance? That's actually on my list for 5.1. Configuration files contain tags to run. If you mean the configuration object, it can have everything that you can specify. So yeah, all the filters, all the definitions, everything is on the configuration object. And I think that's everything. I will try to answer to the rest of them if I find some afterwards. So thanks.